let's have a look at the troupes of Commedia dell'arte. When we talk of early professional performers, it is important to recognize, and here I'm going to quote Kenneth Richards, it's important to recognize that there was a really vast range and variety of Italian players and professional theatre activities in the 16th and 17th century. This means that we know that there were both companies closely associated with courts, distinguished independent traveling companies, as well as lesser itinerant troupes of various size, and possibly even small groups of just 2 or 3 performers. So it's a kind of wide range from the most popular, famous, and well supported by the patronage of the aristocracy to small performers that were trying to make a living, moving from piazza to piazza when they could, obviously. Obviously, we don't have a video recording of that time, but we have some written documentation and pictorial documentation of the time. But most of the information are about the famous troupes, but very little is known about the less successful ones. They didn't benefit from the patronage of the aristocracy. It's a bit like today. It's probably what will pass to posterity is the big famous actor of Hollywood, but not necessarily all the more kind of grassroots independent companies and artists. Obviously nowadays different because everything goes very fast, and through video documentation everyone is able to pass to posterity, let's say, some documentation of the work done. But back then it wasn't like that, and most of the information we got is about the most important troupes. And again, quoting Kenneth Richards here, I would say that also we don't have so much information about the first half of the 16th century, but we know of an important event that took place on the 25th of February 1545, when 8 men in Padua signed a contract and committed to travel and perform for a year as a unit. Now, this is very important because this is considered the earliest formal documentation of a Commedia dell'arte troupe. So, arbitrary, 1545 is the year, the birth of Commedia dell'arte, but obviously that's not the case. There were many professional acting companies performing before 1545 in the regions, all across the peninsula. So definitely Commedia dell'arte as a form of theatre was born before 1545, but this is when we have an official document that testifies the existence of organized troupe of professional actors. Going back to the term mercenary art, so this idea of making a living or selling a product being the performance, making the highest profit brings with it also another a necessity for the comedianti at that time, which is traveling. Italian Renaissance professional theatre companies were itinerant. They had to move from piazza to piazza, from square to square, from city to city. I want to give you a little historical contextualization. Italy wasn't unified until 1861, so very late. So in the 16th century, Italy didn't exist as a concept, as a nation, but it consisted in an agglomeration of independent small states, and each state capital or large town represented a new market with audiences of different socio-economical background that could provide that the income that we were talking about before. So you could sell. The more you travel, the more audiences you could reach. The troupes could perform both indoor and outdoor. So yes, streets and squares, but more frequently and progressively more frequently as the troupe became bigger or more famous, they frequently performed in enclosed spaces. These spaces could be town halls, stanze, that means rooms, so rooms that were designed, devoted to performances, courts, room, theatres, and purpose-built structures. Performing indoor offered the advantage to control the box office, making sure that spectators paid. The major companies also, that is very important, They enjoyed a wide social patronage and were often invited to perform for special events and ceremonies, for instance, for important weddings at royal courts and palaces all across Europe. Let's see now the structure of these troupes. Well, first of all, the actors, of course, or commedianti. The actors of Commedia dell'arte, the early troupes attracted performers with a really wide range of abilities and different cultural and social backgrounds. Again, going back to this meeting of opposites, as I said before, we have now also a meeting of people that come from different backgrounds. On one hand, you might have literate people that studied humanities, humanist studies, and they are well read, with a great knowledge of literature and written form of poetry, but also plays. And on the other hand, street performers. And in this moment, you might have these two meeting together and bringing to the troupe their skills, making available their specific skills. Actors had the great freedom. There isn't a written play and a playwright, and there isn't a director as we understand it today. So actors had a great freedom to utilize their skills, first of all, their experience, their personal taste, and also their repertoire of rehearsed material that included both written material and physical comic gags. And so we go back to be careful not to overemphasize the improvisation in Commedia dell'arte. Each actor had their tricks of the trade, let's say, ready to be used at the appropriate moment. And that's what I mean. So, yes, improvisation. But they had prepared material. They had tested this material. They knew when to bring up specific moments, specific rehearsed bits, being that dialogues, soliloquy, sproloquy, or comic gags, physical comic gags. An important figure is the figure of the capocomico. The capocomico was an actor in the troupe who had a role comparable to that of a producer today. The responsibility might include arranging bookings, controlling, obviously, the finances, and often coaching young actors and rehearsing new material. The troupe leader wasn't necessarily a lead actor, but in fact we know that some distinguished troupes were led by actresses. And then we have the figure of the corago. So in Commedia dell'arte, troupes didn't have, as I said, playwright and director, but because in Commedia dell'arte we have scenari, which are not written plays, but they are structure. They tell us what happens in the scenes, but we don't have a written play. But the company might have had a corago, that means more someone that orchestrates the overall performance. Look at the choreography, so the movement and the composition on stage. Crucial for the success of the troupes were actresses. They became members of the companies from the 1560s onward, at least from obviously the documentation available to us. Actresses were widely followed not only by the populace but also by the elite. Actresses and actors could perform both improvised and premeditated comedies, so actors were really versatile. So it's not true that Commedia dell'arte actors were doing only Commedia dell'arte and they were playing only that character for the rest of their life. They actually performed whatever they could perform, and often they were performing written plays. They were very versatile in performing in the improvised form of Commedia dell'arte, but also in tragedies, in written comedies. This skill was very important, was considered very important for the capocomico who was putting together a troupe for touring, because you needed to have that versatility in order to offer to the patron as much as possible. So if they wanted to see a commedia all'improvvisa, they would see an improvised comedy. But if they wanted to see a play, they could see a play. And if they want to see a tragedy, they could see a tragedy. And if they wanted to see you dances or singing, the same.